and welcome back to Silicon Sounds, audio for the rest of us. Today I have the distinct pleasure of reviewing this IEM, the 7 Hz Legato, or as I'd like to title this review, When What Was, Is. So let's begin with notes. My introduction really to the joys of audio reproduction was a long time ago in the early 80s actually, through my dad, my father. He was a proud owner of a new Philips component system, which at the time was pretty cool stuff. It included an integrated amplifier, AM/FM tuner, still working by the way, after almost 30 years, in fact 30 years, and some ginormous speakers featuring a long throw 15-inch woofer, 4-inch dome mid-range, and a 1-inch dome tweeter. Soon after, a pair, not one but two, a pair of Thorens turntables joined the setup. I fondly remember excitedly waiting for the house to be empty and blasting my newly released vinyl copy of Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by the Eurythmics, only to glance out of my right eye and see my father glaring down the stairs at me in silence. I quickly turned on the volume and he just kept quiet. Then he walked away. I really believe he really enjoyed how the system was sounding, and I do remember it sounding very robust and clean. After finding the component synergy that worked well with the Legato, we're talking about tip selection, cable selection, and source, I had the same feelings from long ago wash over me again. This is vintage sound brought into the present and updated. The 7 Hz Legato is an ambitious release from a company best known for the timeless. It's ambitious in that it eschews it kind of throws to the side the Harman tuning mania that the majority of IEM manufacturers hold dear, for a tuning approach that is more akin to what I would call comfort food for the ears. It features a somewhat V-shaped, I'll call it V-shaped, but bass prominent sound signature with a mid-range and treble that do not get lost in the mix. The tuners, the skilled tuners, made sure that they paid attention to the mid-range and the treble. I've seen this described, and it's not my wording, but I'll use it here, as bass fi, and that really fits what the Legato is all about. The Legato features a dual dynamic driver setup with a 12 millimeter driver for the bass, subwoofer quality bass, okay, paired with a 6 millimeter driver for mid-range and high-frequency duties. Driver complement aside, what really stands out here is the crossover employed, and it does employ a crossover which uses 8 Japanese source audio grade tantalum capacitors. My understanding is that much work was done on the crossover, a lot of tweaks. It received a lot of attention during development, and the results have definitely paid off. The Legato is also moderately easy to drive, but, and a big caveat here, and I have to stress this, needs a very capable source to sound its best, as in lots of clean power being available, lots of current drive being available. It is a source and tip and cable sensitive IEM, so time spent searching for the proper synergy will pay off in dividends. Underpowering the Legato will result in a more muddy and indecisive sound, which improves noticeably when powering it properly. You will see a number of reviews out there. Reviews are very subjective. That being said, it'll be good if reviewers can show what kind of equipment they're using to drive the Legato. In my experience and experience of some other reviewers and people that I actually trust, they have all found unequivocally that Legato sings when given ample power. I've tried the Legato with a number of quality dongles that are in my modest collection, and only the E1DA 9038 SG3 and to some great extent, the Apogee Groove did it any justice. Best sound came from my desktop setup with a topping A50S amplifier, which has great output and good current capability as the driving force. I also recommend a more neutral or bright neutral source to be paired with a Legato, as a warmer source will really lead to too much of a good thing. The 7 Hz Legato demands and definitely deserves quality time spent finding that synergy that works best. While controversial, what I'm going to say now, to some, ample burn-in time of at least 48 to 72 hours or more, well, maxing out at maybe 100, will go a long way in seasoning the Legato for your listening pleasure. This should not be overlooked. Specs. Let's get through some specs here. Driver complement, as mentioned before, 6mm dynamic driver handling the mids and the high frequencies, and a large 12mm diameter dynamic driver handling the bass duties. The diaphragm is a 4th generation DLC composite diaphragm. Impedance 26 ohms at 1 kilohertz. Sensitivity is 108 decibels measured at 1 kilohertz. Frequency response 10 hertz to 20 kilohertz. THD, total harmonic distortion, less than 1% at 1 kilohertz. Again, take this with a grain of salt. Cable is an OCC plus silver plated copper cable. It's a 78mm 2-pin. And the case material is CNC aviation grade aluminum. We see here, this is the nice HTK Black Cat. This is a different cable. It was recommended to be used with Legato and paired very well. Equipment used for evaluation, of course. Final evaluation was done, for the most part, with the topping A50S amplifier paired with the SML Sanskrit 10th generation Mark II DAC. Moondrop spring tips, which are presently on the Legato. I'll give you a closer look. There they are. These are the Moondrop springs. Sorry for any wax that's there. Again, my videos are unscripted and one-off. And I also did try wide bore BGVP W07s. Again, the cable is the nice HCK Black Cat zinc copper alloy oil soaked, whatever that means. But the cable does pair very well with the Legato. Build, fit, and quality. The 7Hz Legato is an attractive and well-built IEM. Very, very nice. Simple, nice. See all the ports there? Very nice. The machined aluminum shells are nicely finished with a tasteful texture accent on the faceplate, which hopefully the camera can pick up. It's got a nice, almost like round ridges here. Retail presentation is good with all the items housed in a beautiful carrying case that, while not necessarily pocket friendly, it's a little on the large side. So it serves its purpose with style. The included accessories are of obvious good quality, including the cable, which displays great haptics and is not an afterthought that many manufacturers include with their products, regardless of price, it seems these days. Kudos to 7Hz for also including an above average selection of quality tips. The IEM itself is of medium size and has an interesting shape. While some have had issues with fit given its unusual shape, I had no such issues to report, and the Legato was very easy to get in my ear and stay in my ear for extended periods of time. Interesting nozzle. Very good. Let's get to the sound. Let's get to what really matters here, the sound. Bass. The 7Hz Legato has a bass that harks back to those big speaker boxes of old, but upgraded to modern standards. Bass is prominent and goes deep, being linear as it descends into the depths. Bass dynamics, weight, impact, and rumble are all impressive. There is some minor mid-bass bleed, but what it really does is just adds a measure of warmth to the lower mid-range. Considering the quantity of bass on tap here, control remains relatively tight. Again, it has to be powered correctly in order to have this kind of bass presentation. Underpowered, you have a loose, muddy bass that is not a pleasure to listen to at all. Moving up the chain with respect to sources, what we have is a tightening of the bass and a much more pleasant listening experience. Listening to Angel by Massive Attack was a joy. The driving bass line was conveyed with solid authority, and while still relaying the texture of the bass that this bass line has, if you're familiar with that track. Circumstance by Wayman Tisdale sounded very good with great separation of the backing bass line and the lead bass guitar. There's two bass guitars in that track. And the Legato was very good at having a separation between those two and hearing each two distinctly and clearly. Even with this impressive quantity of bass output, Legato's low end isn't plodding or loose, when powered adequately, that is. Bass texture and detail retrieval are not class leading, but still commendable. This is quite a feat for this type of tuning, to be sure. The Legato is not uncolored in the bass. It's not, but it is addicting. I can't stress enough, and let me tell you about this one more time, of driving the legato properly, in particular when it comes to the bass presentation. Having had conversations with one of the tuners and given my own experiences and that of a few people whom I trust, it is essential that the legato be driven by a competent amplifier and or dongle with enough current output capabilities to extract the best sound that the legato is capable of producing. When driven properly, the legato offers a great old school bass experience that some will call bass head done right. I just call it satisfying and addictive, and I also call it well done. Moving on to the mid-range. The mid-range of the 7 Hz legato is slightly recessed and, contrary to the frequency graph, does not get swallowed up by the bass. There is an average detail retrieval heard, but with a rich presentation. Clarity, in particular in the lower mids, is average, particularly when directly compared to some other earphones in the price range, such as the standout High Senior T2. But it does improve as we move to the upper mid-range, and definitely improves as we reach the treble region. The spaciousness of the mid-range is notable, and the legato never sounds closed in or claustrophobic, even as layering is just about average in this part of the frequency range. The mids have a smooth, easy listening quality about them, and without direct comparison to some of its capable competitors, it's easy to forget any shortcomings and just spend time listening to the music. And that's really what a lot of this is about. Stop being technical and just enjoy the music. Transients are handled well, but they're somewhat rounded with respect to impact. There's no harshness noted, thankfully, in the mid-range at all. Timbre, even given the tuning target of legato, is actually quite acceptable in the mid-range up to the treble, in particular in the treble. This may be why long listening sessions are easy to cope with and actually pleasurable. Overall, the mid-range of the 7 Hz legato is easy to listen to for extended periods. It will not win awards, let's be straight, for being the cleanest, the most detailed in its price category, but what it offers is a safe, pleasant listening experience that isn't overshadowed by the prominent bass. It still sounds good. Treble. Now this is where the biggest surprise for the legato was with me. Treble is fairly extended, but it does have a roll-off at the top. Treble rebounds from the more average mid-range with a clean, organic presentation that took me by surprise given the bass-driven tuning. The treble also does not get lost considering the bass output capabilities. Move this around a bit. Detail is good, but definitely more macro than micro details. The legato does not excel at micro detailization, but surprisingly, the legato is able to render cymbals surprisingly well, even if the highest frequencies are rolled off. Vanced in Place 12 AM by Ronnie Jordan sounded splendid with a crisp treble and clean treble heard throughout. No Worries by Robert Glasper, one of my go-to tracks for testing and evaluating IEMs, sounded good, quite good actually. There's incredible percussion work in this track, and it did sound better than most sets, or some sets I should say, I've recently heard at significantly higher cost. The legato is not a bright sunshine, it's shiny bright IEM at all. But what it does offer in the treble I found very pleasing and again surprising, again if it's driven adequately. Otherwise it can actually sound dark. Also, the legato is not the end game when it comes to air and space around the treble instruments. But what it does offer is a very coherent, very clean, and very pleasant, organic sounding treble, which I like very much. Imaging and soundstage. Well, legato offers a moderate sized soundstage with adequate instrument replacement. It's not razor sharp, but it's adequate. Width and height and depth are presented in more or less natural proportions. Again, imaging is not razor sharp, but it's enough to keep things interesting and not be a detriment to the overall sound. It does not sound wishy-washy. Conclusion, and here's the big conclusion about the legato. The legato is a salute to the sounds heard long ago, now brought into the present with updates. The legato does not hide its character, not at all. This is a bass prominent IEM to be sure, and bass heads will be happy. That being said, the Legato is not a one-trick pony. This is what is called a bass fly, and the mid-range and treble have not been forgotten by the capable tuners. Soul food for the ears and guilty pleasure are two good descriptions as to what the 7 Hz Legato brings to the table. I was pleasantly surprised how well it played back a good portion of my library, which includes a large selection of jazz, smooth jazz, and soul tracks, among other tracks that are bass heavy, such as my reggae tracks and my house as well. But when talking about my soul, my jazz and smooth jazz, the Legato played it back quite well. These are the kind of genres where pounding bass is not the name of the game. And this is where I purposely started my journey with the Legato. A journey of broad discovery, as opposed to just focusing on the bass. The Legato did very well. The 7 Hz Legato offers a cohesive sound with enough bass to satisfy all but the most hardcore bass enthusiast. Its talents are not singular though, and it can provide a satisfying listening experience regardless of the musical genre that you listen to. Some will be better than others, but none will be where you can't listen. Is the Legato for everyone? Well, that's a crazy question because the answer is no, as there does not exist a single earphone that can claim that status. Bass-shy listeners, though, will be better served looking elsewhere. For those who, though, enjoy a fun and versatile sound, the Legato will please. The 7 Hz Legato will remain in my shortlist, my IAM rotation list. And it gets a firm recommendation from Silicon Sounds. Just make sure to power it properly. I want to thank you very much for watching this review from Silicon Sounds. Please like, subscribe to the channel. Check out the links below for our blog as well, where these reviews also will appear. And see you in the next review.